Good morning and welcome to Newsmakers. If you lived in greater Cincinnati in the 1980s, you know that no other politician dominated the local scene quite like Ken Blackwell. In the late 1970s, Blackwell was elected to council as a charterite and chosen to be mayor in December 1979. 14 months later, he switched parties, becoming a Republican, and emerged as the mastermind behind an unconventional cross-party coalition that allowed him to call the shots at City Hall. Developing a close relationship to Jack Kemp on the national level, Blackwell served under Kemp in the Department of Housing and Urban Development in the early 1990s. After a stint at the United Nations, Blackwell returned to Ohio, being appointed treasurer in 1993, and then becoming the first African American to win a statewide office when he won the treasurer's race outright in 1994. We are joined this morning by Ken Blackwell, who currently serves as the Ohio State Treasurer, but, like always, is weighing future options. Welcome to Newsmakers.
Good to be with you, Dan.
Okay. For those of us who have known you a long time, and we go back a long way.
Absolutely.
The idea of Ken Blackwell sitting in the State House with a green eye shade as the Ohio Treasurer, poring over ledgers looking for misplaced or misspent pennies, it just doesn't fit. What is it about this job that fits in with you and your personality? I mean, I've always thought of you as somebody who likes the big picture questions.
Well, I tell you, I've in fact tried to change the structure and the character of the job of state treasurer. I am not a captive of the 270 Beltway in Central Ohio. I and my staff get out quite regularly, working with farmers, talking with working moms, trying to figure out how we, in fact, can redirect a lot of our investment dollars away from Wall Street and back to Main Street, Ohio. So we've created programs that help us to help local communities to create jobs, increase home ownership, create savings for college for working families and their children.
Give me a concrete example of that where you're redirecting the investment money from traditional investments into these local communities.
But essentially what we've done in 3 years is that we've redirected $1 billion from Wall Street investment firms to local banks. What we've done by using our depository authority is to expand the deposit basis of local banks, allowing them to increase their lending to small businesses, to those seeking to improve their homes or to own a home for the first time. We have our linked deposit program where we work with banks to give farmers and small business owners cheaper capital without putting tax dollars at risk. And so it is through that partnership with local banks as opposed to Wall Street firms that we're able to help working families in Ohio.
You mentioned, I mean, with that, but you also mentioned that you and your staff get out beyond the 270 Beltway. Those of us in Cincinnati live inside the I-275 Beltway, and living inside the 275 Beltway, you know, we tend not to pay too much attention to the rest of Ohio. We're sort of a city-state down here. What have you learned, as someone who grew up in Cincinnati, what have you learned about Ohio in this job? And what this state really is that maybe has surprised you, changed your mind about things?
Well, growing up in the West End, I grew up an urban kid. I did not know how significant a factor farming and agriculture is in this state. So my 3 years of experience as state treasurer has put me in the homes, on the farms of a lot of working farmers across the state. But the other thing that has impressed me is the diversity of the state. You know, you have a little bit of Kansas here in Ohio along the western side of the state. Toledo is a bit like Michigan. Cleveland is more like New York and the East Coast, with Cincinnati and its southern flavor. And so you have to be able to work that diversity if you want to lead the state. So building coalitions, bridging these disparate personalities has been a real leadership challenge, but it's also been a learning experience for me as I've gone across the state.
So Ohio is a microcosm of the United States. Isn't a bad place for a politician who may have interest on the national level someday.
Well, I tell you, you learned a lot at Xavier.
Okay, let's get down to some questions here that are a little bit harder than where the money ought to go.
Mm-hmm.
You've talked openly about the possibility of running for governor in 1998. And last week we had Bob Taft, who is also clearly going to run for governor. Are you serious about this? Is this a real interest of yours, or are you just sort of playing this out to see what happens?
No, it's a real interest, but I've in fact taken it seriously. So I've talked with family and friends. I'm now talking to county chairmen across the state. I'm listening to people. I have a sort of dictum, listen, learn, and then lead. And I'm right now in my listening and learning mode. I think that it is so typical of America that Bob Taft, of a leading Ohio family, and a kid who grew up in the West End and who looked forward to going down to the end of 4th Street and visiting the Taft House and the museum there, can both be aspiring to be governor of the state. Bob and Hope Taft are personal friends of mine, but I think that leading this state into the 21st century, it's about competing ideas, competing visions, and leadership talent. And I'm not going to shortchange myself and short-circuit an opportunity if I in fact assess it to be real and viable, and that I'm ready for it.
Last week, and I think generally it is seen that Bob Taft is someone who is committed to continuing the relatively successful, in political terms, policies, direction of George Voinovich. You say that you have different ideas, different vision, different leadership style. How do you differ from Bob Taft and or George Voinovich?
Well, one of the clearest areas of demarcation is the way that we feel about tax policy in this state. I think tax policy in Ohio is arcane. I think that it is a crying shame that the average working family in Ohio pays 40% of its income in direct taxes to state, local, and the federal government. And if you add indirect taxes, like the price of electricity that is driven by tax policy in the state, indirect and direct tax burden on the average working family is about 49–50%. So you have one wage earner working for the government and the other wage earner working for a family, and the average 2 wage earner families. And so I think that has to be changed. So I've put together a program that basically calls for wholesale tax reform. One, I think we ought to make it more difficult for the state legislature to raise our taxes. So I've been an advocate for a supermajority requirement on tax increases in the state of Ohio. Secondly, I think it's outrageous that we allow in this state for inflation to push working families into higher tax brackets, and without their purchasing power increase, the tax bite increases. So I've called for indexing the tax structure. I think that we need to have a permanent 10% tax cut, and we need to stop dribbling people back their hard-earned money because we are now sitting on substantial surpluses. And lastly, I think that we ought to really be looking at going away from a graduated 9-rate system to a single-rate system that's more conducive to economic growth, creating opportunities, producing jobs, and expanding businesses.
The other side of those proposals is that the impact is that it will cut state income, tax income. And now, as a supply sider, I know you'll want to argue with that, but give me that for a second. Anyway.
Tom Hellstones is listening to you.
Yeah,
now.
Let's go. Just remember, though, that at some point here, the state Supreme Court is going to hand down this ruling on schools. And clearly, Ohio is going to have to raise significant funding, and I suspect new funds, to support the schools in a new way. If you're cutting taxes and yet experiencing this new obligation. How do you put those two things together? Cutting taxes, everybody loves to hear that. But how do you put it together with responsible support for those things, schools and welfare particularly?
Well, I think one of the things that you have to start from is an understanding that you raise revenue a couple of ways. You can either raise revenue by increasing tax rates and increasing the tax burden, or in fact you can grow your tax base. Whether it was Calvin Coolidge in the 1920s, John Kennedy in the 60s, or Ronald Reagan in the 80s, they understood that in order to grow the base, you cut taxes. They cut taxes, the base and revenue grew in the 20s, in the 60s, and in the 80s. Now, I will tell you this, that I think that when personal growth is being outstripped by state spending, and when state spending exceeds inflation, then we have a situation where we are stifling the growth of our tax base, and we're really not increasing revenue because we're creating a disincentive for people to stay here, for people to work here, and for new businesses to locate here. So I really think that, and I'll give you a more concrete answer to, let me just give you one example. Okay. The cost of to working families for this unfair, unvoted tax of unindexed tax structure is $200 million. And that's out of a biennial budget of probably about $35 billion. I would tell you this, that instead of creating surpluses of $1 billion and $1.2 billion, that if we would allow those people, those working families, to keep that money, that we would see it turn over in the private sector growth in a way that would increase revenue to the state. I will not let anybody knock me off of my supply side belief. I got it from Tom Hellstones at Xavier University. I've seen it in play, and I can tell you, right across this country, those states with single rate systems are growing at a faster clip than those states with a multi-rate system, and they're not suffering from a revenue deficit. It is time for new, bold ideas, and if somebody wants to defend the status quo and they think it's right for government to be spending at a rate faster than personal income growth and faster than inflation, then I think that's a wooden-headed notion, and it's going to back us in to the 21st century, and as opposed to propelling us in to the 21st century with growth and jobs and opportunity for our children.
Shift a little bit from ideas to the nitty-gritty of politics. Bob Taft has raised $2 million for this gubernatorial race already. It sounds like you've raised maybe about $400,000. Realistically, what's it going to take to run a serious primary and general campaign for governor in this state, and can you do that?
Well, I think you have to take care of A before you go to B. You have to take care of the primary before you even consider the general. Bob Taft will probably raise another $1 million. I will not raise $3 million, but if I raise 1.5 or $2 million, which is possible, I will be able to spend competitively. I think my work ethic, I think the power of my ideas in combination with competitive dollars puts me in a position to be competitive with Bob.
Okay.
And I think, you know, if we both spend down to zero, whoever the winner is, with what is at stake in the general, the Republican Party and concerned Ohioans will not let us lose the general because we don't have enough money.
One of the things about winning that primary is getting out into those areas we were talking about before. So as treasurer, getting out and talking to the farmers and talking to people in areas of the state you haven't been in for as much as this part of the state. I can see where that's important. A tough question is, in those parts of the state, in the sections of the state that you have to run well if you're going to beat Bob Taft, will people vote for an African American in the Republican Party?
The answer is yes. They already have. They did in '94 when I ran, and I've been out there for 3 years. Not only have I been out there talking, I've been out there delivering. I've been delivering service. I've been sharing values and ideas, but I've been listening to them. and bringing back their ideas in programmatic ways that has made a difference in their lives. I can tell you this, that people always ask me about the race factor. It is not a significant factor. The more significant factor is the factor of familiarity. And when you break down the wall of unfamiliarity, people then begin to look at your ideas, look at your work ethic, your leadership capabilities, and they vote on that basis. I've never let race stop me from being involved in any race, political race. I can tell you, when I started out here in Cincinnati, I was told not to run on the west side. I became a top vote getter on the west side once people understood that me, my father, my mother, we had the same concerns as they did.
Yeah, but in a city situation where you can get to people on a one-on-one basis is one thing, but the state's a big place, and I don't doubt that you're going to run hard in those places that don't know you.
And I've been doing it for 3 years.
But can you reach, can you shake enough hands? Can you talk to enough meetings? Can you get out there to break that familiarity barrier?
Absolutely. And again, remember, these are folks who have seen my name on the ballot, and they voted for me, and they will vote for me again. I think that this is going to be, it could be, a classic race between Bob and the Nixonian wing of the party and Ken Blackwell and the Reaganite wing of the party. And I think all of my supply siders and believers in school choice and what have you will come to my support.
Well, there's a lot more we could talk about, and I got a feeling you're going to be back on Newsmakers. Thanks for being with us this morning, and have fun out on those farms.
Dan, good being with you.
Okay. For the past 5 months, the Cincinnati School Board and its teachers have struggled over a new contract. This time, the central issue was not money, but a proposed school-based reform program. Stay with us. After the break, we'll talk with the principals about who gained what in this contract, and which will be voted on tomorrow. Welcome back. Labor contracts usually focus on money issues, but the recent negotiations between the Cincinnati Board of Education and the Cincinnati Federation of Teachers has revolved around the adoption and implementation of a reform proposal dubbed Students First. A tentative agreement was reached 10 days ago, and tomorrow both the school board and the teachers will vote on the new contract. To discuss the substance of the proposed agreement, I am joined by Lynn Marmer, the president of the Cincinnati School Board, and Tom Mooney, the president of the Cincinnati Federation of Teachers. Good morning. Welcome to Newsmakers.
Good morning.
Lynn, the board administration put out the Student First proposal at the beginning of the school year, the end of the summer. You've now gone through this negotiation. How much of it is intact? What are you coming out of the negotiation with?
Oh, we put out a proposal in August. It was then reviewed by the community, teachers, parents, the administration, refined, and then approved in a more final form in December. And I think what happened in the negotiations was very positive. It refined it even further, put some specifics there where there had been none before. I think the plan is very much intact, and we are looking forward to going out into the schools and being developed.
Concretely, what did you have to give up to get this agreement?
I think both sides gave up.
What did you give up?
Well, there's more money on the table than we initially proposed. We are now at a 3% raise instead of a 2% raise. But in terms of the plan, really, I think the plan stayed intact, and we didn't have to give up anything. I think we worked very cooperatively around that.
Tom, you and the teachers had a lot of problems with the lack of specificity of the plan early on, some real questions about how it might work in practice. Where's this plan now that we're out of the negotiations, from your perspective?
Well, mostly it's just a lot more specific. The biggest teacher reaction in the fall was fairly negative on two grounds: past experience with reforms being badly implemented, without enough training, without enough planning, without enough follow-through. And secondly, that it was just very vague. It was a set of concepts which they couldn't seem to get questions answered about or couldn't seem to get the same answer twice. So what mainly we've done is just make it a plan as opposed to just a set of concepts. But we never did have a disagreement about the core concepts, that teachers working more in teams is a good idea, that schools should have more autonomy, that we want to decentralize rather than a bureaucratic system. We have a long way to go to accomplish that. But conceptually, there was never disagreement on the direction.
But you did have some questions about, you were saying that what this plan would mean in practice was that if it was implemented, art teachers, gym teachers, librarians at certain levels could and probably would be eliminated. Did that change?
Yes, there were lots of fears about that, very genuine fears. What is the final agreement says is that the board cannot cut them. The funding for those positions is guaranteed in the team-based schools. The schools become part of this plan. The schools themselves, through a fairly elaborate process that assures that there's a pretty high degree of consensus at the school, can make decisions to reallocate funds or positions.
So the board can't eliminate those positions, but local schools could?
Absolutely. And never did we take the position that the union is going to stand in the way of whatever schools want to do. The union's position always was, we want to make sure that there really is a decision-making process at the school that's sound. We want to regulate the process, but we don't want to, obstruct whatever decision that they really want to make at the school. That's why the key dispute became whether you should require a 2/3 vote of the whole faculty anytime any of those positions are traded in. That's the one thing, if you want to say, what did we give up? We compromised on that. That is not in the agreement. There are enough other safeguards, though, that we feel confident that the faculty and the parents of that school will, if they're paying attention, nothing's going to happen that they don't want to happen.
So, as the plan stands now, Lynn, in order for local school that's participating in the plan to make a decision to change the way it spends money concretely on staff, what does it take to make those sorts of decisions?
There'll be two local leadership bodies. One is called an instructional leadership team, and that has 60% teachers on it. And then there's also what's called a local school decision-making body, and that's a more balanced or equally weighted committee. And both of those committees will have to decide.
By simple majorities?
That's really up to them to decide, because those governance rules are rules that those bodies get to select and develop for themselves. And that's really what this is all about. This is about the schools themselves creating structures in which parents, teachers, and the community work together on reforming the individual school. And those kinds of rules are things that we left it open for them to decide.
But there are some other safeguards. One concern you heard us express is that these local school decision-making committees, which are 50% parent and community, in most schools, the parent representatives didn't really get there by parents as a whole electing them. So the agreement says that those bodies must be properly constituted according to the board's policies, so that you just know that the people who are sitting on them really represent those constituencies. That's real important. Second is that this leadership team within the school, that's mostly teachers, has to vote in open session on these matters. Believe it or not, that small procedural safeguard makes a lot of difference to teachers, that they know that there's not going to be some backroom manipulation going on, that they know how their representatives voted. And so, again, if they don't get what they want, it shouldn't happen more than once, and I think that's an important part of the process.
Concretely, now that we're through this process, be voted on tomorrow, I'm assuming both of you are recommending that this be adopted by both sides. Assuming this gets adopted, is this the turning point that's going to change results in the classroom?
We hope so. I don't think that we should oversell this and have anybody think that in 6 months it's going to be totally different. We are dealing with extremely difficult problems, but I think from our perspective this is very positive. We are trying to set up a structure where we think we will be the most successful.
I think it's important that it not be oversold, and the hot debate about how to do this decentralization got so much attention that it overshadowed other key elements of our reform plans that are already or were already in progress that we believe are even more fundamental, and those are academic standards, which we are way out ahead of other districts on defining and eliminating social promotion. You must meet certain standards to be promoted and to graduate. Those are becoming more uniform across the district each year. Second, strong behavior standards. And one of the important parts of our agreement away from the bargaining table right now is we're going to repair what we think were some damage to the discipline code done probably inadvertently last year. But those two elements, behavior standards, academic standards, are equally or more important than any structural or design changes we're making in the schoolhouse. As a package, along with a lot of professional standards that we've also put in place, and better training and better recruitment and better career advancement opportunities for teachers, it's a whole package that we believe and hope is going to make a real difference.
Is the next big symbolic, substantive issue that we're going to be seeing coming up about changing the way schools operate is decisions on principals this spring? Is that what the public should be looking at right now, and whether certain principals get rehired?
I think that's been a continuing concern of the board, of the teachers, of the public in general, and I think you're going to see that we are going to have some pretty significant changes in school leadership.
Well, we'll be watching for that. Thank you for joining us. We'll be looking at how the vote goes tomorrow, and on the news we'll be reporting about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us this morning, and be sure to join us next Sunday morning when we have more Local Newsmakers.